Tu B'Av, the 15th day of Av, is listed in the Mishnah as one of the two happiest days of the year. That, along with Yom Kippur, was a big celebration to all the Jewish people. And what would they do on these 2 days? Is that the young women who are unmarried went out into the field and with white gowns, and they would present themselves in front of the young unmarried men, and it would be a day full of shidduchim, relationships, etc. The Gemara goes on to explain that it makes sense that Yom Kippur would be a day to do such a thing because that's a day filled with atonement and tshuva and kapara, fresh start. What happened on Tu B'Av? So the Gemara lists several reasons. One of the reasons is that in the Midbar, the Bnei Yisrael stopped dying. They, from the 40-year Gezerah in that they weren't going to go into Eretz Yisrael and everybody was going to die out, on the 40th year, they didn't die on Tisha B'Av like they each and every year, and they realized on Tu B'Av that it was over and that they stopped dying. In the time also of the going into Eretz Yisrael, there was a gezerah, there was a decree that each of the tribes couldn't intermarry one another in order to make sure that the inheritance stays within, the initial inheritance stayed within the tribe. And that decree was annulled after the first generation, after they conquered the land, that they now had, on Tu B'Av, they were able to intermarry between the Shevitz. The third thing happened is that there was an oath when there was a civil war between the tribe of Binyamin and the rest of Klal Yisrael, that the rest of Klal Yisrael swore not to let Binyamin marry into their family, and they were able to figure out a way, on Tu B'Av, how to annul that decree, that oath as well. So that was three things. The next thing that was they said is the reason for Tu B'Av is that the Haruge Beitar, the people who died in Beitar, and that they weren't their bodies laid strewn on the battlefield for many years. On Tu B'Av, they were allowed to be buried. Okay, and there was a big miracle over there that the bodies didn't rot, etc. That happened on Tu B'Av. The next thing that they say happened is that this is the last day that they would chop wood for the Mizbeach. Since it was the days would get cooler and the wood wouldn't dry out properly, therefore they stopped breaking there and they dedicated more time to learning Torah. Another opinion is it's not only that, the days actually started getting shorter, and since they had more time to focus on Torah, that was a day. So the question that we have to ask ourselves is, I can understand the shidduch between Binyamin and the rest of Klal Yisrael when that decree was annulled. That's a big deal. With B'nai Slavcha, that's a big deal. And that's why it's a good day for shidduchim, because you see it's about marriage, those things. But all the other items that were listed, what do they really have to do with shidduchim? Why did it say that that this was a day that was prime, that we should do this kind of event? So it's possible to say the following. We see when the Jews were in Egypt, or before they actually went down to Egypt, that Yosef, who was the viceroy, married Asnas. And when he married Asnas, he had two children, Ephraim and Menashe. And the Torah points out that he had these children 2 years prior to the beginning of the famine. And Rashi explains that the rationale behind that was that if Klal Yisrael is going to be in suffering, in Sar, it wasn't the proper time to start building families, etc. So we see from there that when Hashem is in a Midas Adin mode, when he's sitting on the Midas Adin, the judgment, and when he's bringing difficult things into the world, that's not the time to build families and build relationships. It's only when Hashem is sitting on his Midas HaChesed, of Rachamim, of mercy, is at the time. So if you look very carefully, each of these incidences that are listed by the Tanaim in the Mishnah for Tu B'Av are when Hashem moved from being a Melech of Din, being on the judgment, the Din side of the throne, to the Midas HaChesed, Midas HaRachamim side. First example is they stopped dying in the Midbar, which means the Gezerah was over of them not going into Eretz Yisrael, and therefore these people stopped dying, and now Klal Yisrael entered a new mode of Chesed. Same thing with the two incidences with B'nai Slavcha, where they became, it was in a din, it was a very harsh din because the halacha actually goes that you're allowed to marry in between the tribes, but there was that was moved, and it became a chesed. Same thing with Binyamin. Similarly with Beitar was also an obvious situation where it was the end of the Chorban bias era, and we were beginning our next period, even though we were in exile, but Hashem's mercy, and He was able to, we had a different level of hashgacha going through. Finally, the last two items about the days getting shorter and the sun getting weaker, what does that have to do with din and chesed, etc.? So that really goes back to the very first sin that was done into the world. We know when Hashem created the world on the fourth day, He wanted to make two great luminaries, the sun and the moon, and they were going to rule over the world. However, the moon complained and said, how can you have two kings with one crown? And Hashem said, you're right, so minimize yourself and you become subservient, secondary to the sun. So what we're saying over here is that when the sun becomes weaker and the days become shorter, we're moving from the epitome of din, where the sun is at its power, all right, and it's the din of Hashem, to a period where the scales are balanced, the days are more equal, the weather is more tempered. It's not as hot. So you see the sun and the moon become imbalanced. So it's meaning Hashem is now bringing us back, and He's moving to the fixing of that first original sin. So we see very clearly that a day, in order that when we are looking for the proper shidduch, when we're looking for the proper relationship, we should be looking to connect to the midas harachamim of Hashem. That's the time where you can find the things that you're really looking for and have that true connection. Have a great day.